Hi, I'm Catherine Llewellyn, the host of the podcast. You can find out all about Truth and Transcendence on truthandtranscendence.com. And you can find out all about me on beingspace.world, where you will find my online coaching offering, as well as my UK-based workshops. The Freedom of Spirit workshop for liberation and empowerment, the Pellower Radical Shift in Consciousness workshop for spiritual expansion, and transformational coaching for exploring the mind-body-spirit connection on the expansive path. You can also support the podcast by actually making a donation. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. And today I'm welcoming special guest, Helen Gretchen Jones, who's here today to talk about self-trust. And Helen is an intuitive death doula and channeler with art history, theology, sound therapy, Reiki, hypnosis, and past life regression in her toolkit. So working with her is not going to be boring or predictable. And you can find Helen on helengretchenjones.com. And the Gretchen part is Gretchen. And in my opinion, trusting ourselves has never been more crucial than it is today. And Helen has been engaging with this deeply for many years. So Helen, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just so excited to be here today.
Wonderful. So I think what you're doing is amazing. And I also love the fact that all your goats have giving birth in the same month suddenly.
Yes. So you have 30 does that are all popping out babies right now. So right after this, I'll be heading back out to the ranch.
Oh my God. Oh, I wonder if any listeners listening to this could say the same. Probably not. So this whole theme of self-trust, Gretchen, you've been looking into that deeply for years. If you cast your mind back, can you remember the first time that you realized that self-trust was something that was very important to you?
I can. I would say that when it really, really hit hard was when I was about 12 years old, I believe. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night to a being of light at the foot of my bed, and the being of light telling me that everything was going to be okay. And I felt so safe and so warm and comforted, and I wasn't fearful that there was a person in my room, which normally I would have been, of course.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was completely natural, like I knew this being and I trusted them fully. But the next morning when I told my parents, they said, specifically my dad, he said, "I believe you believe that's what you saw." And they didn't believe that they thought I dreamed it or that I had imagined it. And they didn't make me feel as though my experience was validated. So I remember thinking, okay, well, I know my experience was real, and it didn't make me question the validity of the experience as much as it made me question the wisdom of my parents, if I could actually trust what their teachings were. So moving forward after age 12, I really questioned all of their choices and actions and weighed them against mine after that experience.
Wow. Isn't that, it's kind of sad in a way, isn't it, that you were faced with that at that age?
That could be one perspective, but the other perspective is that it really laid the foundation for me to have self-trust. And I didn't feel alone because I had this connection with this being of light. And so I felt like they were missing out, not me.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's very heartening to hear. And have you been able to talk about that sort of thing with your parents since then at all?
My dad transitioned in 2015. He was really young. He was in his 50s. And at that point, he was still not open to that type of conversation. After he passed away, though, our connection strengthened. His ability to communicate became much stronger after he died than it was in life. My mother, we have conversations on death and afterlife and all sorts of things now. But she's sort of been on her own path and growing on her own and having her own experiences kind of right alongside me, parallel. So we can talk about it pretty openly now.
Oh, that's wonderful. Fantastic.
Mm.
Well, you must have been quite a self-aware 12-year-old, I would suggest.
I
Have been
think I
quite
was a
young,
self-aware kid.
because some people at the age of 12 would have been, right, okay, maybe I did imagine it.
Sure. And even then, I questioned it a little bit, but I knew deep down that it wasn't the case. Like even now, if I'm doing an intuitive reading with someone, I sit down and I do my meditation and sort of set my intention and prayer beforehand. And then in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, let's not imagine anything. Let's just, don't that self-doubt creeps in a little bit. And then you have to remember that you've had so many beautiful validating experiences and just open yourself up and go for it. And, it never disappoints. But that self-doubt creeps in because we're human and that's going to always be there. But really trusting yourself is where you can override that innate self-doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right about that. And I think self-doubt is kind of endemic or pandemic, you might say, in humanity. I come across it a lot. I come across it in myself, in other people. Even when we know it's not based on anything valid, there's still that ingredient of consciousness that can believe, yeah, no, you haven't got this. You don't know what you're talking about. You're not, So how did it progress from there, your relationship with self-trust?
So as I continued to have more experiences with, I guess, otherworldly entities would be a good way to put it, with spirit guides or angels or whatever vocabulary word works, I began to recognize that the information that they were giving me was very validated, would happen, would come true. So I knew it to be true. And I feel pretty blessed to have had that experience. When I would share this with a friend or with a grandmother, it's shocking how many people would shut it down. I don't remember really having anyone who supported it in my childhood, but I could also at times see light around people. And the light gave me an idea when someone was being honest or dishonest. It was only if they're sharing something with passion and their hand would wave in front of their chest. It would be the light that came from their hand if the hand came in front of the chest. It wasn't like light all around the person. It was very isolated to that area, but it would let me know if they were being honest or not. And when that was happening, I'm just like, well, I can't possibly be the only one seeing this, or I can't possibly be the only one having messages delivered from beings of light, but I couldn't find anyone who was supportive. So that self-trust just continued in that way. As the experiences and messages from the beings of light were being validated, I couldn't just shut them down.
Yeah, yeah. And when you say they were giving you messages that were being validated, what sort of messages were they giving you?
Oh, well, little ones, but they were helpful to my personal, what was happening in my life at the time. For example, um, when my parents were going to be getting divorced, I had a heads up about it. And I told my sister, and she goes, "You're wrong. That's not happening." And then just a couple months later, our parents announce it. But at that point, I had already heard the message. And then I started to recognize things around the house, dad sleeping on the couch, which before I'd been like, "Oh, dad fell asleep on the couch." But because I had that message, that heads up, I was preparing myself and able to, I think, help prepare my sister in some ways.
Yeah.
So like little things like that. Or if someone was telling a half truth and the way the light would come out of the back of their hand, it was more like a shadow. It would come out of the back of their hand. Then I would know that for whatever reason they felt they couldn't be honest with me in that moment. Perhaps it was my mother talking about, "I'm going to go, do this." And then I would see that shadow and I would know she wasn't being honest, but she didn't feel she was trying to protect us, that she could tell us the truth. So I felt like all these little things were happening in life feel easier, better.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to keep that line of communication open to this other stream of consciousness that was coming in.
Yeah. Do you think that if you say you wanted to keep that stream of communication open,
Yeah.
Did you feel like there was a possibility of it not remaining open? Or did you feel like it was going to remain open regardless?
So I felt that it was remaining open, but when I told one of my grandmother about it, she told me it was the devil's work. So I'm dealing with a lot of different spiritual and religious beliefs coming from different parts of the family,
Yeah.
and that I needed to shut it down. So I knew that it was possible to shut it down. I just didn't think that I just didn't see any. It was all so beautiful and positive and
Yeah.
comforting.
Right. So you were affirming your own choice to be receptive to
Yes.
repeatedly as you went through that process. That's a very powerful thing to do, I think, isn't it? That you're receiving something powerful and you're conscious that continuing to receive it is a choice and you continue to make that choice.
I did until my late teens, early 20s. When I went into college, I shut it down.
It all comes out now. So what happened then?
Um, I was going through a big transition. And I think when a lot of people are going through, I think it happens often for people when they're going through big transitions, that they suddenly have a little bit of added help come in from their team in spirit, from God, from angels, whatever. And it can be so much more obvious. Well, for someone who was already as open as I was, it felt almost overwhelming because I was trying to process my own emotions about leaving home, going away to college, making my own choices. I was on my own. So processing that along with what was originally helpful guidance became overwhelming for me. It was all too much happening all the time.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to shut everything down. My connection, and I wanted to focus on let me just get into the dorm. Let me just get, whatever it was that I felt that it was too much happening too fast.
Mm.
And also I wanted to sort of be free without, not that I felt judged in any way from my beings of light, but they made suggestions on things that I could do to be in service to others. And I was not wanting to do that right then. I was kind of selfish going into college, young adult. I wanted to just be me. And they backed off and they gave me space to do that. But after a short time, I graduated college and started a family. They popped back in and I couldn't dismiss them anymore. And they really wanted to focus on compassion and understanding what it is like to be in other people's shoes, not to fix anything, just to be in their shoes and understand what they're going through. And then that's it. And so when they popped back in, I thought, okay, I've been a little self-absorbed for a handful of years now. It's time for me to go back into working with spirit and finding a way to be a better service for myself and for others.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes we need that, don't we? A bit of kind of downtime.
Oh, yeah. I went full throttle all through college. I loved it. So
yeah. And of course, you're almost becoming a different human being in those years, aren't you? You're kind of
you are
transitioning from childhood to mature adulthood.
Yes.
Obviously we all have a lot more maturing to do over the following decades, but it is a significant time. And I completely resonate with that. I mean, in various practices I'm involved with, I've had times when I just need to lean out from it and then later on lean in. And I've known other people who I've worked with who've needed to be very, very involved in what we're doing. And then I need to pause on that now. And they might circle back later. And it's like the break enhances the quality, I think. Did you find that when you came back, was there a different quality to the connection?
Yes, absolutely. It was much stronger. And my team in spirit would tell me that we get to be here. We get to be in this material world and live this physical life. And so basically what I did was I stepped away from my spiritual connection where I was connecting all the time and really focused on this amazing physical world we get to be in. And when I came back to my team in spirit, or they came back to me, they never left me, but they made it obvious that they were sticking around a little more. I had a different, I don't know, I would say, when you're in college, you do things more than you would do as an adult. You gossip a little bit more. You judge people. Oh, look what she's wearing. Look what I'm wearing. It becomes so self-focused, which is fantastic as a growth opportunity. So, but when I came back, I realized how some of my actions were not something that were compatible with what I wanted for myself moving forward. And, and I understood. So now whenever people are gossiping, I have a 13-year-old daughter right now. So she's in middle school. This is like super, they got all their text chains going. I just kind of smile at it. I don't get overly involved in it because I'm just like, oh, they're going to move through this and they're going to grow through this and they need to figure out who they are. And the reason people judge others is because they're not oftentimes strong with who they are.
Yeah.
And so they project onto other people. So I think that's part of growing up.
Yeah.
So, but I needed to experience that full on in order to appreciate it now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it means as well, you can have that compassion for other people in that regard. Excellent. So, as you've then moved forward, you're now working as a death doula and you do all sorts of other things as well. How did you come to be doing that beautiful work?
When my father transitioned in 2015, that was sort of the catalyst for all of that. He was an alcoholic and he developed cirrhosis of the liver, but he kept it to himself. And I could certainly tell. And a lot of the family was in denial. I have a sister, one of my sisters, who didn't have closure with my dad. She still had a lot of stuff that she wanted to work out with him. And he died in rehab and she didn't have the opportunity to have that closure. And it was devastating, both to my dad, who, is of course better now that he transitioned, but especially to my sister, Victoria, who felt like she didn't get that opportunity to express how she was feeling, to share how much she loved him, and to have that healing. When I learned shortly after about a death doula and that one of the roles that they play bedside is that they are able to help families find closure with the dying patient, I thought, wow, I want to be a part of that. If I could keep one family from experiencing what one of my sisters did, that would be huge. And I just sort of gravitated towards that. I already had a connection with spirit and with deceased loved ones and things like that, especially since I had a strong connection with my dad after he transitioned. And I thought maybe this would be a really amazing avenue for me to explore. And it has been.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did you go about exploring it? Because if someone said to me, okay, Catherine, how do you become a death doula? I'm like, I have no idea how you do that.
So, okay. So there are lots of death doula certifications out there. The fantastic thing right now about being a death doula is it is not covered by insurance, which means you don't have all of the paperwork and red tape that nurses have. Used to, nurses would be the ones sitting bedside with patients, and they still can, but they have so much other work that they have to do that it takes away from that one-on-one time with their patients. So a death doula can kind of fill that niche a little bit, and they can sit there and be present with the patient who is dying. I got certified, and I recognized in the certification process that while there was a lot of really interesting things to think about, what would I want for my death, what other people have experienced according to some of the books that I was reading, but people have been helping people die since the beginning of time. How many people have sat with their parent, their grandparent, their husband, their wife, their best friend? Being a death doula is a natural part of life, and it's a natural part of our community.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of fear around death and dying. And I think that a death doula can be helpful in many situations where people struggle with the fear and uncertainty around that. And that's how a death doula can come in and serve.
Yeah. So you basically, you went and got your certification and then just started doing it. I mean, how did you actually make it sound very straightforward, but
It is. Yes. So I got my certification and then I was just like, well, where do I go from here? So I started volunteering with hospice and with NODA. NODA is a No One Dies Alone program here in the United States.
wow.
And it's a hospital-based program, and they're for people who never had children. They are the last of their kind. Maybe they burned all their bridges, or maybe their family lives too far away and can't afford to travel in. And so with the hospital believes that they have 72 hours left or less, they send out an email blast to all these NOTA volunteers to come sit in 3-hour shifts. It's a fantastic program, really. But after I started volunteering, I also I was doing private clients with my intuitive readings, and I don't know, just meeting people and hearing about what I do. And then I would get private clients that way through word of mouth. And it just sort of opened all the doors.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, I must say, it's such a beautiful piece of life that you've got of these light beings coming in at such a young age, and you maintaining and growing that relationship with them over time, and taking the time out from that when you needed to, and then coming back in, and then finding a way into a way of working with people that's fully in alignment with that. I mean, that really is a blessed life in many ways, isn't it? Do you feel like it's a blessed life, or are there other aspects to it which might surprise me? When the way that you described it.
I have to say that I am so grateful for the life that I've been able to lead. I wonder, though, if a lot of it is perspective.
Mm.
Um, because I've met other people who have had experiences with light beings, but they were scared because they were taught that it can't be trusted.
Yeah.
And they did believe that. Or, I came from a childhood that was not very stable, but my perspective on that is, wow, I got to experience so much with different parents and different grandparents. And, I felt like we got to move around a lot and I got to have all these new experiences, or I could really focus on, I didn't have a stable childhood. So it really is your perspective. And I feel like I have been blessed with the most amazing life. And I am so grateful to be here every day. It was a full moon recently, it might have been yesterday, and I was just looking up at that moon and I was just like, wow, thank you that I get to be here to see this today. Just, I don't know, the joy in the little things, kind of keeps you remembering that you get to be here. You don't have to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I was kind of curious about. So obviously, when people are approaching death, there's a whole variety of perspectives people have. You said the word perspective on death, the time leading up to death, and what happens after death. What's that like as an experience for you to be engaging with presumably a wide variety of ideologies, possibly religious perspectives around the meaning and the process of all of that?
So I think it plays a big part, actually. Everyone has a way, or a family has opinion about how they want their loved one to transition. I just have to go in with an open mind and do what they feel is best. And if there's a contradiction or an issue around it, I make it work. The whole point of me being there is to bring peace. So, I did study theology in college. I have a master's in world religions. And so I think that I play into some of that. That is helpful for me when working with different religions at time of death.
Yeah.
But, an example would be I helped a Catholic nun transition. And she was seeing Sister Bernadette, and she was seeing a sister at her bedside, Sister Mary Catherine, who had already transitioned. And Sister Bernadette had me come in, and I was sitting next to her, and she goes, "Close the door. I have a confession to make." And I was thinking, do I need to go get a priest? And she's like, "No, Sister Mary Catherine has been visiting me." And I'm like, "Oh, that's nice." And she's just like, "No, you don't understand. She's already passed away, and she's gone to our Heavenly Father's home, And so she's concerned about it because in her religion, in her faith, she's not allowed to commune with the dead." And I was just, now here it is happening. And so she needs to find peace with that. How can we find peace with that? So it isn't about saying, well, maybe you are allowed to commune with it. It isn't like trying to shift her faith at all. It's about working the experience into her faith. So I said, "Oh, well, you commune with the dead all the time. You talk to Jesus and Mother Mary and God." And she's just like, "No, I pray to them. I don't commune with them." And I was just like, oh, "Okay." And then I said, "Well, do you remember that story in the Bible where Archangel Gabriel came to Mother Mary and told her she was going to be having Jesus? And she's like, yes. And I said, well, Mother Mary, she was talking with a messenger of God. Maybe Sister Mary Catherine is a messenger of God, and she's come to give you a message about your beautiful transition that you're about to have. And she liked that. That fit the mold in a way that was palatable for her. And so I think it's about that. I think it's about, I helped another person, he was Hindu, Mr. A, transition, and his wife had died 30 years before he did. And according to his faith, she should have already reincarnated. So when she started showing up bedside for him, that was a concern for him because it went against his Hindu faith. So again, we talked about maybe it was a vision, a message from God, and we worked it in that way. And that was something that he could, you know, process and feel okay about. But it's about meeting them where they're at and remembering that the first thing that you need to do is bring peace.
Beautiful. I love how you did that. And when you just reminded me that you have studied world religions, no doubt that's very helpful, because if they start talking about their faith, you've got some idea what they're talking about.
I do.
Whereas someone else might listen to it and go, well, I'm sure that's very meaningful for you. I cannot make heads or tails of it.
Well, and let me just say, just because I've studied it, it doesn't mean that that should turn people away from wanting to be a death doula or for wanting to volunteer with hospice or NOTA, because we all have miniature computers in our purses and in our pockets. We have these, we could Google or look up on the internet anything about any world religion we want to get a quick understanding before meeting a patient or after we've met with them, before we meet with them again. Do not let not having a lot of information on specific religions hold you back from serving someone who is in need during their transition.
Thank you very much for that. Editor's note. That's very responsible of you. That's such a good thing to say, because you're quite right. It's the human side, isn't it? So would you like to say a little bit more about what a death doula is bringing to the process?
So a death doula is someone who is coming in and able to be a third party, someone who's not overly emotionally involved with the dying process, someone who could both aid the patient in being able to encourage them to be vulnerable and say what they need to say before they actually are slipping into a stage of being unconscious, and encouraging family to say what they need to say in a kind, respectful way, but being very vulnerable. Sometimes the stuff that unfolds at bedside can be very hurtful and have a lot of history tied to it. So being present through that process and helping families find closure without judgment is one way a death doula serves. A death doula can also help with final paperwork and things like that. Nothing like a will or anything. We're just, do not resuscitates and NDRs, things like that, and little paperwork like that. But also remembering that you don't have to also have spiritual experiences to be a death doula. Now, I have them as a death doula, and it's one of the reasons that I love doing it. But if you are serving the dying community long enough, you're going to have one. You're going to experience a shared death experience. You're going to experience someone telling you, oh, I see angels, or, oh, I see this and I see that. And it can be so uplifting, and it delivers a feeling of hope to those who are listening that there is something after this physical existence. And writing that down, and it changes you. It changes who you are. I encourage anyone who is wanting to learn more about themselves, to trust in themselves more, to see the beauty through the pain, to volunteer or work as a death doula. It really is life-changing.
Oh, I bet. Life-changing for everybody involved.
Everybody.
And I had a guest on once who was talking about, who had I think, 3 near-death experiences. And he was talking about how the way somebody dies can affect how they come back, and can also affect the whole lineage of their family. That something can be put to rest or not put to rest, in that process. And it sounds like if we believe that what they're saying is true, it sounds like what you're doing is profoundly helpful in that regard of the kind of the completion of the life, and then being able to move forward, as you say, in peace and in beauty, rather than dragging a lot of dross with them, some of which may have just been dumped on them at the bedside. Because some people wait, don't they, until someone's dying before they finally tell them the awful thing. And that's just not good.
No, it can be good and not good. I know when someone does share a really awful thing, and I have seen some of that, it's because they're really hurt, and it gives an opportunity for the person who is dying to apologize, to say, "You're right." And sometimes that's all that person needs to hear for healing. I'm a big advocate for saying how you feel when you feel it, and not sugarcoating and beating around the bush. I think so many people, okay, so as I'm serving the dying community, I'm finding that a lot of the people, thankfully, that I'm serving are in their 80s and 90s. I have to also understand that some of my patients are as young as 30. So I've got a wide range, but the people who are in their 80s lived a life, typically, that it mattered what society thought, what image they were putting out. And it mattered, we needed to go to church because that's what everyone in the community is doing, whether we like it or not. We need to dress a certain way. What would the neighbors think? This has been something that has been drilled into them. So I have to approach them knowing that if there's something that they need to get off their chest, or that their children feel the need to express to their parents because they felt so confined and limited, living lives by the perspectives of other people's image, then we have to address it a certain way. When I'm dealing with younger people, there's less pain in that. It's more about acceptance, believe it or not, and feeling like they weren't fully accepted versus being trapped in living a life that you didn't feel was authentic to yourself. So it is important to share these things and not keep putting it off and putting it off. So I say share it, get it all out there. And it isn't as much of a burden to put it on someone when they're dying as it would be to hold on to that and never, ever open up about it.
Words to the wise. Thank you. Very powerful. And of course, it sounds like you are encouraging everyone involved, the person who's in end of life and the family, to trust themselves. As you're saying, you've been practicing in your own life, trust in yourself because of that wonderful encouragement. Have you ever come across somebody who, through knowing you, has come to realize that they do have guidance and support from the light that perhaps they weren't aware of before?
Oh, yes, many people. Absolutely. That happens all the time now. My mom being one of them. So yes, definitely. Most people, I would sure love to get my husband on board. I could tell you that, but he is, he is not. So, we still work fine.
And yet you married him, so
and yet I married him.
he must be amazing in other ways.
He really is, he's fantastic, but he's not, into the beings of light. That's what he is. He's just not my thing. And I'm like, all right, we just let it go. But, I have so many friends who have shifted their perspective and had their experiences validated. I have, I think by being open about what my experiences are, I've lost some friends along the way where this doesn't resonate with them, and that's okay. And I've gained new friends where this really does resonate, and that's just so exciting. So I think everyone is right where they're supposed to be. And if they're not ready for this type of information, that's awesome. They're living a really physically focused life. And, I can't wait to see what they do with that, but it doesn't mean that they have to be experiencing a very spiritual or beings of light or a different level of consciousness, because I do believe that you can find self-trust without a spiritual aspect. I do believe you can have self-trust really focused in your physical experience.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I ask the question is because talking to you, I get this huge sense of encouragement. You've got a very encouraging energy around you. And that sent, I could imagine people spending time with you and feeling encouraged to maybe be open to considering and kind of noticing. And
I hope so. Oh, I hope so.
definitely the sense I get from you. It's lovely, really delightful. So before I'm going to switch in a moment to a slightly different question. But before I do that, would you like to just share with the listeners the variety of ways that you are helping people at the moment? We've talked about being a death doula, but you do other things as well, don't you?
I do. I do. I do intuitive work with people, with, just an individual. Like people will come in and say, okay, it would just be a session. Like they have questions about life. They're unsure which path to take, different things like that. And I intuitively tune in. Now, I always preface every single session that I do with, you have free choice and free will in this life, and you get to choose the path that you take. And sometimes when I'm looking at someone, I will see threads of light coming off of them, like these little golden, it looks like string that come off their head and shoulders. And if they're talking about, should I take the job in New York, and it lights up really, really bright above them, I'm like, well, that's the strongest probability right now, is that you're going to take the job in New York versus, say, California. But I'm learning from my team in spirit. That doesn't mean that that is what's going to happen. That's where they've put most of their energy. So, and their intent, because they have the power to choose how their life unfolds. So when I'm saying, hey, I'm seeing that the job in New York is really, really likely because it's lighting up the brightest, that means you've put a lot of energy into the job in New York. You've put a lot of focus into that and intent, and it's unfolding beautifully. So if that's where you want to go, keep going. That's exactly what you're doing. But if suddenly you have this block and you're like, oh, I don't want to go to New York, I have a fear of subways, I don't know, then you would need to shift your course of action and place your energy into a different location, because you get to choose your path all the time. So when people go to, psychics and things like that, and they're just like, this is going to happen, here's your premonition, my team always says, no, that's a possibility, but you get to choose how it unfolds. And I think that that's really important to remember. That's why I call the session intuitive, because I get kind of hung up on the word psychic and medium sometimes. I do mediumship work. Frequently, loved ones come into these sessions. But as I'm working with my team in spirit, they tell me things like, well, this is a personality. This is an individual personality who is so much more than this one personality, as Catherine on Earth, for example. She's so much more than that. So when I'm pulling in the energy of the entity that was Catherine on Earth before she transitioned, I am limiting myself to all the other aspects and fragment selves of Catherine. So I find it really, really hard to limit myself, but I understand that there's healing in that when a person wants to speak directly to Catherine as they knew her on Earth. So that specific soul places a limitation, and it gives me just that personality, because they're still here. They're still here. They don't go anywhere. They're just experiencing a different way of being. So, but that's me. I get caught up on vocabulary and terms, and understandings, because my team in spirit continues to give me new layers of teaching that I can grasp after I grasp a certain level of teaching. So that's what I do. I do hypnosis. I do past life regressions. But again, my team in spirit says they're really not past life regressions. Those lives are all happening right here, right now. Those are lives considered in the past based on the linear time frame you are recognizing right now. So, but there's still parts of you, fragment parts of you, that you have a connection to based on the information and wisdom that you could gain from such an experience in this current life and apply it. So I know that all sounds a little out there a little bit, but it's a learning process for me too as I work with my team.
Yeah, great. Well, that sounds to me like you are remaining open to multiple levels of reality.
Oh, absolutely.
You're working, but you're not necessarily talking about all those levels of reality when you're working with people. You're being discerning about which aspects are being called into the work in that moment. It doesn't have to be all of
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Right. And those aspects that would be most beneficial for the healing or the highest and greatest good, that brings a higher level of self-awareness for the person I'm working with.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're in service to what's actually relevant to them in the moment.
Yes.
Rather than showing off about all of the fabulous layers and aspects that you can perceive, because that's not
right. But you have to pick the one that works for them. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I totally get that. And I appreciate you for sharing that, because that's like a professional insight into an aspect of what you do. And I think sometimes these professional insights, sometimes it's difficult for people to, when someone shares like you did just then, sometimes it's difficult for some of us to understand it in any given moment. But for some of us, we do get some of it, and that insight adds a lot of value around, like I could, for example, take what you just said and go, that's interesting. How does that apply in my work? And I can immediately see ways in which that applies. And that validates an aspect of something. Oh my God, I've been doing that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
You've just made sense of something in a different way from how I might have done. And I think that's one of the values in these sorts of conversations on podcasts and wherever they're happening. They help us to kind of take another look at what we're doing, what we're bringing, and how we're trying to serve, because of an insight someone's just shared about their own personal process in what they're doing. So thank you so much for that. Very, very powerful and very contributive.
And again, filtered through my mind. So someone else could have the same information filtered through and they would perceive it differently.
Yeah. And articulate it differently and so on. And you would probably articulate it differently in 10 years' time, or 20 or 30, or after you're gone.
That's right. That's right.
Completely another way. Fantastic. Well, I really celebrate what you're doing. So I'm going to switch slightly and say there's a lot going on in the world at the moment. I think we can agree. And everyone's got their own opinions and perspectives about what is happening, what should be happening, what isn't happening, what ought to be done, what oughtn't. And in amongst all of that, there are lots of people who identify as leaders of one sort or another, whether they're an official leader of some kind or whether they're simply being leaders in their own lives. So they want to be part of the solution. Some of those people listen to this podcast. So is there something you'd like to say to those people who are trying to be leaders of one sort or another and trying to be part of the solution in relation to some of what we've been talking about today?
Yes. Okay. So I guess if I were to share what I think would be helpful, it would be simply to start with authenticity, to being authentic to yourself, to not feeling the need to hide some of your gifts and some of your strengths for fear of what other people might think. I think that when you find something that really sparks that little light of joy within you, you do it. You just go for it, and other things will fall into place. Other doors will open. And I think fear is the biggest thing that holds back humanity. Fear of lack, fear of we're not going to have enough money. That country is going to come and invade this country. And and that person is invading that country because they have fear over that person gaining power. I mean, it's fear all over the place. So taking small steps every single day in your life, if something is fearful to you, recognize it and then do something to overcome it. It doesn't mean that the fear is going to go away necessarily, but you can be brave and make a physical action that overrides that fear, even momentarily. And if you do that enough, you start to release that fear completely. And I think that that is one way of really trusting yourself, being authentic with yourself, and not letting limitations such as fear hold you back from doing what you believe is right for you.
Amazing. Wonderful. Okay, well, if you could just write that all down, put it on the side and
remember what I said.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So to remind everyone where you can be found, which is helengretchenjones.com, and Gretchen is Gretchen. And we've talked about quite a lot today.
We did.
Has there been a favorite part of our conversation today for you?
I think just being in front of you, you are so filled with light and you are so delightful and wonderful. It was such a joy to talk with you today and meet with you. And I think that what you're doing to share stories and other people's perspectives really opens people up to having non-judgmental conversations that can be difficult, I think, in our communities.
Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Well, I've loved our conversation as well. And something that is really great sometimes for listeners is to have some sort of inquiry question or reflection question to take away for the coming week. And I wondered if you'd like to offer some sort of reflection question that people can take away to help themselves engage more deeply with what we've been talking about.
I guess my question would be what sparks your joy every single day? And I'll also just follow up with that. Like if you're stuck at home and you know you have to clean house and you're looking at the pile of laundry or you're looking at the dishes, it could be as simple as in that moment, which one seems more appealing to do in that moment first? Okay, it's the laundry. Well, that's following a little spark of joy. You don't have to be like, climbing Mount Everest, like, yes, all the time. But you can, in every moment, if you do what sounds most enjoyable to you in that moment, what is it? And that's what you do.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much, Helen Gretchen Jones. So that's all for Truth and Transcendence. You can find our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, and share with your friends and comment on what we were discussing today. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. And thank you again, Helen.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. It really helps if you give a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, a review, and share with your friends. If you're looking for transformational coaching or an intensive transformational weekend workshop experience, I can help with that. You can actually help the show by making a donation. Until next time, take care.